Chapter 7 of our text focuses on the American Revolution, and that will be the focus of our study for about the next month or so of class, as it is a very big chapter. As always, I encourage you to read the text, the information in your book, whether we assigned it in class or not, as it can be an excellent supplemental resource for your studies. With this chapter, and particularly this first lesson, which is lesson 4 of chapter 6 actually, it starts on page 160 in your text, we are going to be focusing on 3 main things. We want to talk about some of the early skirmishes between the Continental and British armies, the Battle of Bunker Hill, Siege of Boston, and the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga. We want to talk about a little bit about the importance of Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, as well as discuss how the colonial leaders came about in their decision to declare independence from Great Britain. Let's start off with the Continental Army. After Lexington and Concord, the militiamen from Massachusetts and other colonies began gathering around Boston. A force of about 22,000 soldiers had amassed in this region, with an additional 5,000 militiamen gathering in New York. Now, of these numbers, not all of these soldiers were equipped and fit for battle. Those numbers are probably closer to around half, 11,000 or so soldiers. The people who made up these armies, they were volunteers. They were not necessarily paid soldiers or even trained soldiers. We'll hear that some of them were teachers, some of them owned bookstores, others were lawyers. They came from all walks of life and volunteered their service to the Army for the cause of independence. Many of these people will be paid for their services, but they're going to be paid with money that really doesn't have any backing and has very little value. But they will receive money from the Continental Congress. The standard enlistment at the beginning of the war was a 1-year enlistment, 12 months. As we get into 1777, 1778, then they were longer enlistments. A soldier might enlist for 3 years. Congress feared a permanent army, so they were really unwilling to extend in the early stages of the war, extend those enlistments, but then there became a necessity to have the men around a little bit longer, and that's why they did later on in the war. The Continental Army is really the first time we have a racially integrated army in America, and this doesn't occur again until the Korean War. Now, what I mean is, when we talk about racial integration, it doesn't mean that in other wars there weren't African Americans who participated in those wars. They did. They participated in World War II and World War I and even the Civil War. But what racially integrated means is that they fought side by side in the same regiments as white soldiers. That's what we mean by integrated. A lot of times African American slaves were promised freedom in exchange for their military service. They made up about 1/5 of the Northern Continental Army. For the British, Thomas Gage, he had a pretty good size army that was stationed in Boston. Roughly around 15,000 British regulars were stationed there under his command at this time. In June of 1775, the Second Continental Congress begins meeting, and John Adams calls for the creation or the adoption of the Continental Army, all these soldiers who have amassed around Boston. He wants to adopt them under the control of the Continental Congress, and he kind of issues a statement that he believes that George Washington should be elected the commander-in-chief. Very important to understand about George Washington and why he was chosen. He did have a little bit of a military background from the French and Indian War. He understood the British and in their way of fighting, but also very important that Washington was from Virginia. Virginia was one of the wealthy wealthiest colonies of the 13 colonies, and if you wanted to gain support for independence, you had to have Virginia on your side. This was one of the ways to get Virginia on your side: put a prominent Virginian in charge of the army. And that's what Adams had in mind in kind of nominating George Washington for this post. These American soldiers that are preparing to fight, they are not very well equipped. They don't have any artillery. So one of the first orders of business in May of 1775, we have two separate groups of people who are going to look to attack Fort Ticonderoga in order to capture some lightly guarded artillery that is being stored there. The first is Ethan Allen. He's a Vermont farmer, a businessman, and leader of a group of kind of like rogue soldiers named the Green Mountain Boys, who are also from the area that is today Vermont. He will meet up with another person who's going to become pretty famous in American history, more infamous than famous, famous for doing something bad, and that is Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold is a merchant and ship operator. He's going to meet up with Ethan Allen, and together they are going to lead attack on Fort Ticonderoga, which is on Lake Champlain, and you can see where Ticonderoga is here on this map. The purpose of this attack is to secure those artillery, the cannons, the large guns that are stored there. Now, it was on this very same day that they are leading that attack on Fort Ticonderoga that the Second Continental Congress gathers to debate its next response to Great Britain, decide what they're going to do. And that's around the time where they're going to adopt the army that's up there around Boston, as well as appoint George Washington to lead that army. Just as a side note, both Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold were very successful at Fort Ticonderoga. They were able to capture those weapons without any bloodshed, and very shortly they will begin the process of moving those weapons, about 60 tons of weapons, from Ticonderoga to Boston, which will be kind of southeast to Boston there. This leads us to our next battle in June of 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill. It kind of has a very ironic name, as the main portion of this battle actually took place on a different hill, Breed's Hill, which you can see on this map of the Charleston Peninsula that we have on the page here. In June of 1775, the militiamen who were surrounding Boston had received some intelligence from their spy networks inside of Boston, suggesting that the British would attempt to control these high grounds near Charleston. The militiamen seized both Bunker and Breed's Hill in Charleston, overlooking Boston Harbor. Overnight, the militia built fortifications on the hillside, preparing for attack. When the British woke, they found that Breed's Hill had been fortified with an earthen wall measuring about 160 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 6 feet deep. Alarmed by these fortifications, the British decided to attack. Now, there is a lot of discrepancy in this story about whether or not the British knew that they were digging in overnight, if they had done this overnight secretly. We believe that, most historians believe that the British knew exactly what was going on there, but they were so full of themselves that they really didn't think that the militia had much to offer or would put up much resistance at going against the strength of the British Army. The next morning, the new commander of the British soldiers in America, General William Howe, crossed the bay with about 2,200 British soldiers and began marching up Breed's Hill. These were the best soldiers. The 2,200 that he gathered for this first attack, they were the best that he had. It was his main group of forces, like the equivalent of our Navy SEALs or our Army Rangers, the elite fighting force. They're going to march directly up Breed's Hill and lead a full frontal attack on the earthworks that are there and those colonial soldiers. Now, Colonel William Prescott, the commander of the colonial forces on that hillside, he ordered his men to not fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The colonials, as we mentioned, they were light on weapons and light on ammunition. They couldn't afford to miss. So they had to wait until the British really got almost on top of them, closed in on them, before they let loose and expelled their weapons into the British attacking soldiers, forcing them to retreat. The British charged the hill twice more before the colonials ran out of ammunition and they were forced to retreat. Now, when we look at this battle and the winners and losers here, what we find is that we kind of give this battle to the British. They were able to take this land that the colonials were holding. They pushed them off of the land. The colonials had to retreat. But when we look more in depth at it, it came with a great cost, about 1,000 killed and wounded, compared with about 400 of the Patriots. The colonials also got a psychological boost from standing toe-to-toe with not only the power of the English army, but that first group that attacked, they were the elite guys, and they were able to send them retreating.